Today, we're diving into something pretty huge, a series of constitutional changes in Texas. Some people are saying these changes basically dismantled local democracy, leaving voters with, well, the illusion of choice, but not a lot of real power.
All right, so let's just jump right in with a big question. Imagine this. What if casting your vote didn't really mean anything? What if it was just a formality, something you do, but it had no real power to change how your city is run or where your tax dollars go?
You know, we tend to think about democracy ending in some big, dramatic way, like a coup or something you'd see in a movie. But what we're going to break down here is how it can happen much more quietly. Not with a bang, but by someone methodically and permanently rewriting the rulebook.
Okay, so let's get into our first section, the rules of power. We're going to look at what happened back in November 2025, when the very foundation of power in Texas got a major shakeup. And listen, this wasn't just about passing a few new laws. This was about changing the state's constitution, the actual bedrock document of its government.
So the main strategy they used is a bit of a mouthful. It's called constitutionalization. Think about it like this. A regular law, that can be changed by the next group of politicians who get elected. But when you move a policy into the Constitution itself, you're basically setting it in stone. It makes it incredibly hard for anyone to ever change it back. It's a way to lock in your agenda for good, no matter who wins the next election.
And get this is the really wild part. All these massive foundational changes, they were made during a tiny off-year election. We're not talking about a presidential race here. The voter turnout was only about 16%. 16! That means a tiny fraction of the state's population made these monumental decisions that are going to affect Texans for decades to come.
All right, on to our next section. So, how does this all begin? Well, it's pretty simple, actually. If you want to control a big city or a school district, especially one run by your political opponents, but you can't win their local elections, what do? You go for the money. You cut off their financial lifeline. It's the first domino to fall. And one of the key ways this was done was through a proposition that gave homeowners a much bigger property tax exemption. I mean, on the surface, who wouldn't love that, right? A smaller school tax bill. But, and this is a huge but, there was a massive hidden cost, and it was all about who gets to hold the power.
So here's what happened. It's kind of like a fiscal shell game. Local schools suddenly lost a ton of their property tax funding. So the state had to step in and fill that gap with money from the state budget, which, by the way, mostly comes from sales tax, a much less stable source of income. All of a sudden, schools that used to be funded locally are now on a leash, totally dependent on the state legislature in Austin. That's what centralization of power by fiscal proxy really means, controlling them by controlling the money.
And hey, it wasn't just schools. They used a similar playbook on cities and counties, giving huge tax exemptions to businesses. And this is where it gets really clever, or cynical, depending on how you look at it. It creates this perfect political trap. Step 1, the state starves the cities of cash. Step 2, suddenly, there's not enough money for basic stuff like police and fire departments. Step 3, what can the mayor do? To keep the city running, they have to raise the tax rate on everyone who's left. And then boom, Step 4, the folks at the state capitol point their fingers and yell about high local taxes and out-of-control spending. They literally create the problem and then blame local officials for it.
Okay, so if you're keeping score, local governments have had their funding squeezed. What's their last line of defense? Well, it would be the courts, right? An independent judiciary. So, what do you think happened next? Yep, that was the next target. Because what good is a game if the referee works for the other team?
Now, this next move was done through something that sounds super boring and technical, Proposition 12, all about the State Commission on Judicial Conduct. But don't let the name fool you. Its impact was absolutely massive. It completely changed who gets to be the judge of the judges.
And you can see the change right here. Look at the before side, the commission that oversees judges. It was balanced. You had a mix of people, power was shared. No one person or office had total control. Now, look at the after side. The governor now gets to appoint a 7-person majority to that commission. A clear majority. That's a fundamental shift, basically wiping out the separation of powers for this crucial job. So why is this such a big deal? Because now the governor's office has a new, very powerful tool. With a loyal majority on that commission, they can go after any judge who steps out of line with the state's agenda. Think about an elected judge in a big city who wants to stand up for local control. Now they've got this threat hanging over their head. It sends a pretty clear message and has a real chilling effect on judges being truly independent.
So let's recap where we are. Local governments have been financially starved. The courts have been weakened as an independent check on power. The stage is now perfectly set for a massive power grab by the state capital, Austin, and that's when local democracy starts to feel like, well, just a formality.
I mean, this table really lays it all out, doesn't it? Look at the pattern. School funding used to be local, now it's state-controlled. Judicial discipline used to be independent, now it's the governor's office. Business regulation used to be up to the cities, now it's up to the state legislature. You see the trend here? In every single one of these key areas, power was taken away from local communities and pulled into the state capital.
Which brings us to our final section, and really, the most serious consequence of all of this. This is where the last domino falls and the very idea of a meaningful election starts to look like an illusion.
So let's just think about this new reality. Put yourself in the shoes of a mayor or a school board member. You can't raise the money your community needs. You can't go to the courts for a fair shake against the state. You're left holding the bag for everything that goes wrong, crumbling roads, underfunded schools, but you have literally no power to fix any of it. People elected you to solve problems, but the state's own constitution has now been rewritten to tie your hands behind your back.
And folks, that's really the end game here. This is how you hollow out a democracy from the inside out. Sure, the voting booths are still there. You can still go and cast a ballot, but when all the biggest decisions, the ones that really matter, are already locked into the Constitution, your vote to change things doesn't really matter. That power has been taken away.
So it leaves us with one last, pretty unsettling question to think about. If all the major outcomes are already set in stone, written right into the Constitution, where voters can't touch them, what are you really voting for?